They say the night hides more than it reveals. That when the world goes quiet, and you're left alone with only your thoughts, the darkness begins to whisper. But what if those whispers aren't your imagination? What if they're warnings, echoes from something watching, something waiting? Tonight, I bring you 3 stories. Stories of late-night voices that should never have spoken, motel rooms that should never have been opened, and forests that should never have been entered. These tales aren't just about fear. They're about choices. Because at every moment, you'll find yourself asking the same questions the characters did. Would I open that door? Would I answer that call? Would I follow that voice? Think carefully. Because sometimes the scariest part of a story isn't what happens to them, it's imagining what would happen to you. It was 2:37 in the morning when radio host Mark Dwyer leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The station was almost empty, the kind of silence that makes even the hum of fluorescent lights feel alive. His late-night show wasn't famous, but it had loyal night owls, truckers, insomniacs, people searching for voices in the darkness. Mark always said the same thing when the clock pushed past midnight: "You're not alone out there." But that night, he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. The call came at 2:41. A woman's voice, faint, like it was traveling through static. "Hello, Mark," she said softly. "I've been waiting for you." Mark froze. He hadn't given his name on air tonight. Only his listeners knew him as the Midnight Voice. So how did she know? "Who is this?" he asked, forcing a chuckle. The woman giggled, but it didn't sound right. It was too close, too wet, as if her mouth hovered just inches from his ear. "You don't remember me," she whispered. "You should. I died on your show." Mark's skin prickled. His chest tightened. He had been hosting for 12 years, had something like that ever happened? Had someone died on air? "What are you talking about?" he demanded. The woman's breathing grew louder, filling the studio speakers. "Do you want me to remind you? And here's the first question for you, the listener. If you heard a stranger claim they died because of you, would you keep listening, or hang up immediately?" Mark wanted to hang up. But something inside him, something sick and curious, kept him hooked. The woman began to hum. It was a lullaby. The same tune his mother used to sing to him when he was a child. But his mother had never been on the radio. And she had been dead for 20 years. Mark whispered, "Who are you really?" Her answer was a whisper so sharp it cut through the static, "I'm in the hallway." Mark's eyes darted toward the studio door. The tiny square window in the metal door was pitch black. Nothing moved. Nothing should be there. He was alone. Or at least, he thought he was. Then came the sound, the squeak of shoes dragging across linoleum. Slow. Deliberate. Getting closer. "Another question for you. Would you open the door, just to prove to yourself nothing was there? Or would you sit frozen, praying the footsteps stopped?" Mark didn't move. His throat was dry. He reached for the station's security feed, pulling the grainy camera footage onto the monitor. The hallway outside the studio flickered onto the screen. And there she was. A woman in a hospital gown, soaked with something dark. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, hair sticking to her face. She stood inches from the studio door, lips moving, though no sound came out. But through the phone, he heard her whisper, "Let me in." Mark yanked the cord from the phone. The line went dead. But when he looked back at the monitor, the hallway was empty. Relief washed over him. until the studio phone rang again. Louder. Angrier. Mark answered with a shaking hand. "I told you," the voice hissed, "I'm already inside." The studio lights flickered. The humming filled the room, surrounding him. And as he turned toward the corner of the studio, where the shadows pooled deepest, he saw her. Bent, broken, smiling. She whispered one last question before the lights died completely. "Now, Mark, who will you tell your listeners keeps you company tonight?" The highway was empty, stretching into darkness like an endless scar across the earth. Rain hammered the windshield as Daniel Harper gripped the steering wheel, fighting fatigue. He had been driving for nearly 12 hours, his eyes heavy, his mind foggy. When the neon glow of a roadside motel cut through the storm, it felt like salvation. The sign read, "Moonlight Inn, Vacancy." Daniel pulled in. The parking lot was nearly deserted, just a few scattered cars reflecting the rain. The office smelled of stale coffee and mildew. An old clerk looked up from behind the counter, his eyes pale, his smile thin. "Just one night?" the clerk asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. The clerk slid a tarnished brass key across the counter. "Room 6. Daniel frowned. "Don't you use cards here?" The clerk chuckled softly. "Not for that room. Only the key." Those words should have been a warning, but exhaustion dulled Daniel's instincts. He took the key and made his way through the rain. Room 6 was at the far end of the corridor, its door slightly warped, paint peeling. When he pushed it open, a musty chill crept out, smelling of damp carpet and something faintly metallic. He turned on the light. The room was ordinary. Bed, nightstand, old TV bolted to the dresser. But the wallpaper was torn in several places, and the mirror above the dresser had a spiderweb crack across its center. Daniel tossed his bag onto the bed and sighed. Yet something was wrong. The air felt thick. Heavy. Like the room itself was watching him. He tried to shake it off, showered quickly, and collapsed into bed. But sleep didn't come easy. The storm outside raged, and beneath the thunder he swore he heard voices. Faint whispers. From the corner of the room. Here's a question for you. If you heard whispers in an empty motel room, would you turn on the lights, or bury yourself under the covers, hoping they'd stop? Daniel forced himself up and flicked on the lamp. The whispers cut off instantly. Silence pressed in. That's when he noticed it. The carpet near the dresser was darker, stained. He knelt down, touched it. Damp. But not with water. With blood. Daniel stumbled back, heart pounding. He tried to laugh it off. Maybe the storm leaked through the ceiling. Maybe it wasn't blood at all. But then the phone rang. The landline on the nightstand buzzed, an old rotary phone that hadn't been there when he entered. Daniel stared at it, frozen. Slowly, he lifted the receiver. A voice, barely a whisper, breathed through the static. "You shouldn't be in this room." His stomach knotted. "Who is this?" "Room 6 isn't empty," the voice hissed. The line went dead. Daniel dropped the receiver. His pulse thundered in his ears. He grabbed his bag and rushed for the door. But when he yanked it open, the hallway was gone. Instead, another room stretched out before him, identical to the one he was in. Bed. Mirror. Nightstand. Everything the same. Except this one had a figure sitting on the bed. A woman in a soaked dress, her head bowed, hair dripping across her face. Her hands rested in her lap, twisted and broken. Slowly, she raised her head. Her eyes were hollow sockets. She smiled. Another question for you. If you saw something like that, would you slam the door shut, or would your body betray you, locking you in place as the thing stood to greet you? Daniel slammed the door. His chest heaved. He turned back to the room, only to find the woman now standing in the corner. She whispered, "They never check out, Daniel." His blood froze. How did she know his name? The mirror cracked again, lines splitting across the glass until his reflection was no longer his own. The figure staring back had hollow eyes, the same smile as the woman. The lamp flickered. The whispers returned, louder, overlapping voices filling the room. Daniel clawed at the door, screaming for help. He pounded until his fists bled, until his voice broke. And then silence. When the motel clerk returned the next morning, room 6 was empty again. Bed made. No sign of Daniel Harper. Just a brass key waiting on the nightstand, and a cracked mirror that seemed to smile. They say the forest has its own eyes. That if you wander too deep, you'll feel them long before you ever see them. Emily, Ryan, and Claire didn't believe in those kinds of stories. They were college friends on a weekend camping trip, chasing adventure before graduation split them apart. They picked a remote forest in the Appalachian Mountains, far from trails, where the trees grew so close together the sunlight barely touched the ground. By the time they set up camp, the woods already felt wrong. The trees leaned inward, their twisted branches knotting together like skeletal fingers. No birds. No crickets. No sound at all. Just silence so heavy it pressed against their eardrums. "Feels like we're being watched," Ryan joked, tossing a log into the fire. They laughed, but none of them felt like laughing. That night, as the fire crackled, Emily swore she saw movement between the trees. Just a flicker of pale skin, gone in an instant. Here's a question for you. If you were camping in a forest that felt alive, would you pack up and leave immediately, or would curiosity keep you there, daring you to push your luck? They stayed. At midnight, the firewood ran low. Claire volunteered to fetch more. She disappeared into the dark with a flashlight, her beam bobbing between the trees. Minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. Emily and Ryan called her name, but the forest swallowed their voices. Finally, Ryan grabbed a lantern. "Stay here," he told Emily. "I'll find her." But he never came back. Emily sat alone, trembling. The fire burned low, shadows crawling closer. She clutched her phone, but there was no signal, no light but the dim embers. And then, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. From the darkness behind her. She spun around, heart slamming in her chest. Ryan? Claire? Silence. Another question. If you heard footsteps circling your campsite, would you shine your light into the trees, or close your eyes, pretending you heard nothing at all? Emily forced herself to look. She raised her lantern, its glow stretching across the tree line. That's when she saw them. Dozens of pale faces peering between the trees. Hollow eyes. Too many teeth. Their bodies hidden in the dark, only their heads leaning forward, watching her. Emily stumbled back, gasping. When she blinked, the faces were gone. Only the trees remained. She packed her bag in a frenzy, shoving everything inside, desperate to leave. She followed the trail they came from, except it wasn't there anymore. The forest had shifted. Every tree looked the same. The woods weren't letting her go. She ran. Branches tore at her clothes, roots clawed at her ankles. Her lantern flickered and died, plunging her into blackness. That's when she heard Claire's voice. Soft. Weak. "Emily, help me." Emily froze. The voice came from ahead, deep in the trees. But then she heard Ryan. Behind her. "Emily, this way." Both voices. Calling. Opposite directions. Another question: if two people you loved called for you from the darkness, which would you follow? Or would you run in neither direction, knowing something was wrong? Emily screamed, spun in circles, clutching her head. Tears streaked her face. The voices grew louder. Closer. And then, dozens more joined in. Echoes of Ryan, echoes of Claire, all around her. Whispering, laughing, crying. The forest itself was speaking with their voices. She collapsed, covering her ears, but the sound poured in anyway. The last thing Emily remembered was the feeling of cold fingers wrapping around her arms, dragging her into the earth. 3 stories. 3 warnings. A radio voice that should never have been answered. A motel room that should never have been entered. A forest that should never have been trusted. But here's the question I leave you with: if you found yourself in their place, would you have survived? Or would the darkness have chosen you too? Think carefully tonight, when the world goes quiet and the whispers return. Because maybe they're not just stories. Maybe they're invitations.